Most people think that innovation is all about technology, often for the sake of it. They think it's very expensive. They think it has to be done in a very structured way. But actually, frugal innovation explodes all those myths. Frugal innovation is an approach to innovation that's focused on doing things faster, better, and cheaper. Another way to think about it is doing more and better with less. Most of my career had been spent initially on studying how Western corporations innovate, which is very structured and expensive. But when I started to study how innovation was done in emerging economies, I discovered that it was very different. It was very frugal, it was very agile, and it was very inclusive. So they are actually leapfrogging the world in terms of taking existing technologies and coming up with highly affordable solutions for large numbers of people across sectors, from financial services to energy to healthcare, education, and so forth. India Stack is one example where the Indian government gave every Indian a unique digital ID. And on top of that, they have built many layers to enable financial inclusion. This has brought millions of people into the banking system, but also created a level playing field for fintech startups to enter and compete with established banks. But it's not just India that is doing this. If we look around the world, Brazil has its own equivalent of the India Stack, a system called PIX, which has done something very similar, driving frugal innovation in the financial system to enable financial inclusion. And now we see many African countries as well trying to do the same thing. For instance, in Ethiopia, they have an initiative to give their citizens a digital ID to enable bringing people from the informal economy into the formal economy. And something similar is being done in South Africa and in fact many other countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Frugal innovation is fundamentally reshaping how we work with technology. Instead of coming up with new technologies for the sake of doing that, which can be very expensive, frugal innovation looks at what's already there, existing technologies that are ubiquitous, and uses those to come up with very affordable solutions faster and better. There are many challenges that people who try to do frugal innovation face. First of all, if they are trying to do frugal innovation in highly resource-constrained environments, a problem that might arise is when they try to scale their solution. Because scaling solutions requires resources. So if they have limited resources, then they might struggle to scale. Now, if you're in an environment where you have lots of resources, your challenge is the opposite, because your temptation is to do more with more rather than more with less. And so in that kind of context, you have to be very disciplined and you have to really try to limit your access to resources or the access to resources of your team. The developed world can learn a lot from how frugal innovation is done in the emerging economies around the world. First, they can develop this appreciation for working under constraints. Often in the developed world, we have the sense of having limited resources. And of course, that's not true. Particularly with climate change, we have constraints on all kinds of non-renewable resources. Emerging markets face those constraints and have found a way to innovate around those constraints. So the developed world can learn a lot from that. But it's not only about conserving scarce natural resources. It's also about time. Often we only have limited time, as we saw during COVID. There may be pressures to do things faster, not just cheaper. And there again, the developed world can learn from emerging markets, because in emerging markets, the pace of change is much greater, and therefore people know how to work in a more agile way. Some advice to businesses trying to adopt frugal innovation. First of all, think about what's the problem you're trying to solve and for whom. It's very important to understand what is the real problem from the perspective of the person who's facing that problem. Once you understand that, then try and come up with a solution to the problem. But when you come up with a solution to the problem, resist the temptation to come up with something entirely new. Instead, look at what's already there that can help you come up with a solution faster, better, or cheaper. Very often, the people who are facing the problem often have a rudimentary solution themselves. You could build on that and come up with a much better solution. Leaders have a very important role to play in frugal innovation. If they're leaders in a startup, for instance, they are often already frugal in their approach. As I said, they don't often have a lot of resources, so they have to be frugal. They don't have a lot of structures in place, so they can be agile. So often, leaders in startups can be very good at frugal innovation. Leaders in large companies might find it harder to be champions of frugal innovation because often large companies have big budgets, they have very structured approaches to doing innovation. So leaders in large companies need to be able to find ways to champion these frugal, flexible, inclusive approaches to innovation. They can do that by empowering certain people in their organization, or they can look for it outside the organization, in startups or in other partners that they can either form alliances with or potentially even acquire. For governments, there are many, many opportunities to approach how they serve their citizens better using these principles. First, they can apply frugal innovation to coming up with faster, better, cheaper solutions for services for their citizens. Think about healthcare or education or social security and so on. But governments can also think about how they can regulate these kinds of innovation in order to enable economic prosperity. The message to governments and policymakers is to think very hard about how they can do more and better with less. The temptation often is to either think about raising taxes and spending more or cutting taxes and spending less. And neither of those solutions is a good solution. Instead, think about how you can do things faster, better, and cheaper to serve your citizens better. There is actually a fundamental link between frugal innovation and sustainability. Frugal innovation is all about making the best use of limited resources, but so too is sustainability. So if we are going to ensure growth and prosperity for 8 billion people around the planet, but we also have only one planet with which to do that, we have to learn how to do things faster, better, and cheaper. We have to learn how to do more and better with less.